everybody, and I mean absolutely everybody, every content creator out there who says that they go to events and they play in tournament games, they do the whole, oh, this is how to prepare for a tournament talk. And I'm not going to do that because it's been covered to death. So instead, who I've got here, I've got Charles back, if you want to say hello, Charles.
Hello.
Hello, hello. And between us, what we've actually got is something like 50 years worth of tournament experience. Which is it's something that we do not like to admit at all. But I've got him here, and what we're going to be doing, I asked you guys to basically give us your questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at those questions related to going to tournaments, how we prepare for tournaments, maybe get some of our hot takes from events that we've been to, maybe some interesting things. And we're just going to have a little bit of a round table about that. And I think that's going to be a little bit more interesting than the whole, oh yes, when I go to events, what I'm going to do is make sure I bring my tape measure, make sure I use deodorant, that kind of thing. So yeah, we're going to go into that. But before we get started, as always, if you want to throw some more support my way, please do not forget to like and subscribe. And alternatively, if you want to do just a little bit more, you can join me here on YouTube. I've got all the links down below. You can join me on Patreon if you want a bit of a sneak peek as to what's coming next, or if you want to have your say in the kinds of content that I make, or alternatively, if none of that is for you, we've got a Streamlabs account where you can give us your support that way. Okay, so I've got a whole bunch of questions here from various members of my community. I've kind of loosely grouped them into themes, so we're going to look at a bunch of questions at a time, and me and Charles are basically going to have a chat about them to see how best we can answer them. So starting off, we got Wargames on Toast, a friend of the channel. You love your underrepresented tricksy warbands. What got you into that? Following on from that, how does Charles's mentality differ when he heads into the lab and conjures his lists, chooses which factions he's going to play? And similarly from the Wong, when creating a tournament list for Warcry, do you build to win or are you building to have fun? And does that change for other games? So to answer this to begin with, from my side at least, I'm going to give a little bit of background into what kind of a player I was and what kind of a player I am now. Like I said, I've been doing this for about 25 years, going to events and playing competitive Games Workshop games. So we started way back when, I think, Charles, it was like 3rd edition, 40k? Is that when we started? I think you
I started at the end of 2nd and then into 3rd edition 40k.
Yeah.
When I started.
Yeah. So for me, it was like I had the 2nd edition Tyranid book, but I never really played 2nd edition. It was just a thing. I had some models and I had the book. But the first game I really played and went to events for was 3rd Ed 40k. Yeah, and I'm almost ashamed to admit it. I was the sweatiest try-hard player you could ever imagine. And it was really for the first, 10 years or so, I was like, okay, I want to win my games. I'm going to be a meta chaser, let's say, and I'm going to build my lists like that. But then things kind of developed along for me, and it turned from I'm going to try and win the event, and I'm going to try and take the best list to win the event, to here is a bunch of factions that I really like, so I'm going to play these factions, and I'm going to try and make the best list that I can for those factions themselves, and try and win the event with those factions. Now, obviously, that doesn't always work out, right? Because some factions are just better than others. It's Games Workshop. That's kind of how they make their money. Switching around the meta. So yeah, nowadays I'm very much in the latter camp where I'm going to pick a warband in say for Warcry, right? I'm going to pick a warband that I really like from a design standpoint, or I like the gimmick that they might do, or I like their playstyle of their design. And I'm going to push that as far as I can to get it as competitive as possible, get in all the reps that I can with that list. And then that's what I'm going to bring to events. And that's kind of how I choose warbands nowadays, more about how they play and the idea of the warband, as opposed to, is it going to be necessarily the strongest thing in the world?
That's kind of similar. Yeah, again, when we started, it was all actually about winning, because that's kind of really what it was. You either won or you lost in your games.
Yeah.
I tend to now aim for at least a 50-50. Like, if I can win, excellent. If I at least go if it's 6 rounds, 3 and 3, or 2 and 2, or better, I've had a good event. It's only if you just absolutely have a terrible, you don't win anything at all because you've just either been outplayed or just the dice haven't gone your way. It's still never a bad event, but there's still something for actually being able to win something rather than not. List building though, yeah, it's kind of, well, half the time it's what's a bit different, what's a bit fun, what's new sometimes. With things like the ogres, it was like, oh, the ogres actually look pretty good. Let's give them a try. I started with Silverdeath, and we played a couple of test games. And I'm just like, the Silverdeath are just far too squishy. They just can't stand up to anything that hits them. And they were like, oh well, you've got your Blight Kings in your collection. How are Blight Kings stack up? Let's give them a try, and they worked relatively well. So picking list is sometimes one of those ones of just looking at what's available and just going, well, how do these work? How do they stack up? How do the stats work? But yeah, it's a lot of just what do we have that we already own, so we don't have to spend huge amounts more money sometimes. Look for something that will do well rather than that will win. So you don't always have to win, but winning is always a bonus. And sometimes those oddball lists, like the Hunters of Wanshi that you've played, they'll win because people don't understand how they win, and they'll try and play against them in the way they normally would, and then the hunters will go, cool, you're playing exactly how I want you to play, and run away with the treasure. So yeah, it's a very much a different style of play to what we started with.
Yes.
It's a lot more. Winning is a nice thing to do, but it's sometimes secondary to just actually getting games in a like organized format.
So I basically only play Games Workshop games nowadays, but you do a whole bunch more stuff that you go to events for, right? You go to is it Flames of War. You go to
there's Flames of War and Team Yankee, which is 15 mil scale World War II and what's called World War III or Cold War.
Yeah,
those are more like your traditional 40k and fantasy style games and size. I still play a bit 40k. We play Blood Bowl. We used to play a lot of X-Wing in X-Wing 1 and 2, and that was a very much more serious game because there was prize support on the line for that. And we also play card games, and that's again a very different kind of metric with that.
Yes, very much so. But yeah, I think I think that answers these questions. So yeah, let's move on. Okay, big ones here. No Bride Foul. He asks, one thing I've encountered in cards and mini games is trying to predict matchups. Make sure a list is good at everything or great at something. Sometimes they have a major weakness that can be offset, that kind of thing. How do we address taking specific answers to threats? So, for example, in Blood Bowl, if he takes tackle, it seems he won't match up against any teams with dodge as well as the inverse. No Bride Foul says that he takes more all-comers skill generally with a heavy slant towards a certain playstyle, but he still finds it's missing a tool. So what's our approach to this dilemma? And linked to that, we've got Airship Montreal. When list building, what's your general strategy? Do you kind of try to build all round lists, or do you build with a clear strength and try and play your list towards a certain thing? So for me on this one, I think nowadays, kind of links to what I was saying before, I try and get whatever the warbandit is that I'm playing, I see what they are good at, and I try and push that to the extreme. And the idea being is that if a warband has a certain weakness, let's say it's got certain mission types that it might not necessarily be the best in. When you're playing in a tournament, and if as long as you've got like a balanced mission pack, let's say. So let's say for Warcry, you've got kill missions, you've got treasure missions, you've got objective missions. Warbands generally won't do well in all three of those mission types. And I think that if you want a chance of winning an event, your warband or your list or whatever has to really look to do well in at least 2 out of 3 of those missions. So for me personally, instead of trying to shoehorn something into the warband that I'm playing to try and make it good at a mission that it's not good at, and ultimately it never becomes good at that mission type, I'd rather make what the warband does very strong so I can really push my advantage in those other mission types. And so that's kind of what I try and do, especially if I'm playing something like Hunters of Wanshi, which famously don't have any damage. But what they're very good at doing is they're very good at treasure because they got speed, and they're very good at objective missions. So I try and push in that direction and really build to Warband's strengths, as opposed to just try and make it do this all-round, all-comers thing that it might not necessarily be the best at.
Yeah, it's a very similar kind of thing. It's one thing is knowing your meta essentially. If you follow any of the scene you're in, or even just your local scene, you know what people play, or you know what is good from talk on the net. And it is wondering, okay, are you going to play against these things? What answers do you have? And really, that's the main thing. You do either build a list with a specific goal, like Hunters, which is, I'm not going to get hit, I'm going to run around you. Whereas I took the Gorgers to our last event, and I was hoping for a kind of mediumly heavy field, and I played essentially 4 other elite games where my massive damage output wasn't as good, seeing as everything else I was hitting was almost as tough as I was.
They're all Stormcast.
Yeah, that was the thing. The hardest game was the Stormcast, where they were hitting me as hard as I was hitting them, and all the other games as well. I came up against Iron Golems, and their ogre is better than my ogres. So yeah, it is about looking at what you have available. Like if you're playing Warcry specifically, the pick of faction does give you a massive kind of, well, if I'm playing destruction, I know I have these tools. Do I bring this tool specifically just in case this happens, or do you take something else? Like there is things like the Brugit, which is just a great 55-point model, but it can really change your strategy of, oh, this guy hits hard to this guy hits really hard. It is, there's a lot to do, and it is just really knowing your event, knowing the matchups that you may face, and trying the best you can to really generally play to all comers. So if you do plan for one thing and then suddenly you come up against an opponent that's doing the exact same thing, your plan's not going to work anymore. You're going to have to be able to switch gears on the fly, which not a lot of teams can do. Sometimes if you're a combat team, you're now having to run around and you're only movement 3, you're going to have a hard time playing that chase game. But all you then do is you just switch to bullying people off points with your numbers.
Yes. I think for me, that's like building like this is very much limited to how I play in Warcry itself. I think for other games, I try and build. Again, I'm picking whichever team that I want to pick or whichever faction that I want to pick, right? But I try and build a much more rounded list in other games. I don't know if that's just a quirk of Warcry, where the teams are smaller, so the strengths and weaknesses are amplified. But for something like Age of Sigmar or 40k or Old World's just come out, and the kind of lists that I'm writing for that are very much all comers with a little bit of everything and a little bit of just some way to deal with all the different threats.
That's kind of a difference between the traditional skirmish game and the traditional war game. Like with a war game, you have a lot more scope for your army, and your army does have to be a bit more take on all comers in some ways, but you also have a lot more to play with to put those tools in. Whereas in like a skirmish game like Warcry, you have a very, very limited pool of options, and you can either go all down one route or weaken yourself in other areas for all the bans.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. 100%. Next one is a quick one from Darren Schmidt. What's in your Warcry Go-Bag? In other words, what do you bring to make sure you've got enough stuff and not too many things that it gets cluttered? I've got it. I've got it here, basically, so I can show you guys. It's basically rulebook, dice tape measure, easy, glue, and then I've got, so anyone who's playing Warcry, I picked up one of these infinity cases like a long time ago, and it is exactly the right size for
battle foam, that one I think it is.
Yes, it was a battle foam one, yeah. And it's exactly the right size for your skirmish stuff and any other like periphery that you want to put in there. What I'm high on at the moment, which is something that we found out for Warcry, are these. Let me just see if you can see them. What are these? These, yeah, cool. You can see them. They're dials. effectively.
Mm.
And the one thing that I get at every single event is, oh, you're using dials. That's a really good idea. We pick them up for Aeronautica because there are all sorts of different orders that you can give your ships. But I use them for wound tracking in Warcry. So you can basically turn the dial, get whatever it is you want, put it next to your fighter, and that really opens up a lot of clutter that might otherwise be on the board when you're playing, because you've got things like wound tokens, you've got all sorts of things that you need to track, and I find the dials really work for me. And all that stuff fits in a very small backpack, and yeah, you can take it, and that's really all you need.
Similarly, I use KR's cases, which are their cardboard ones. They do them in a range of sizes, and their smallest quarter size case fits most skirmish games in it.
It's A5, right? It's the tiny one?
Yeah, it's a bit bigger than A5-ish.
Sure.
It's a nice small size. It, again, fits in a bag easy. I've got a small, I think it's for beads or for doing craft, little token case that I use, and it's got all my kill team stuff in mostly, but also tokens for Warcry, and a lot of times you can kind of interchange them. The dials that Itan mentions, a lot of people use them for 40k as well, and for other war games. Anything where it's easier to keep a dial, which takes a lot less space than having sometimes maybe two dice, and dice can easily get knocked over or picked up by accident. Whereas a dial, you're not exactly going to pick up a dial and roll it like a dice.
Yeah. Where did we get them from? I can't.
They were counterattack bases, those ones.
Sure.
But there's a lot of pretty much all of the. If you just search for acrylic tokens, most of them will also do dials in different styles. Things that make your game easier, that just allow you to reduce clutter, is always a good thing. Like the dials to replace all the wound tokens from Warcry, because they are good, but they can get very cluttered on the table.
Yeah, especially when you need to move your fighter, move your 3 or 4 wound tokens. That
And you're suddenly
trailing them.
Or you have two people next to each other, and you're like, which one belongs to which fighter?
Yeah.
But yeah, generally, Warcry rulebook. We actually picked up a little, I say cardboard, thin cardstock dice, your initiative dice thing from one of the events we went to. Keep that with all the Warcry stuff. Yeah, models, tokens. I say the small KR cases. They also do a soft case. Battleframe do their little mini. It's their travel pack, I think it's called, which is the one Itan has. There's a lot of really good small skirmish cases that can fit most factions in them. One thing I do have is I've got a fold down dice tray that's from D&D Dice. That folds nice and flat, and it's nice and sturdy on the table because it pops together. Unlike some, it's a bit better than I find it better than the soft mouse mat ones that kind of curve up and then pin at the corners. It's kind of got like rigid sides, so. But that's one thing I use, just because then you can also put your models in it and move it from table to table.
Yeah, it's very, very useful. One thing is, right, we're playing a skirmish game, so you don't need a lot of stuff. It's not like you're playing 40k where you need your huge case, hundreds of models, and you're doing a thing. So yeah, I think anything to reduce clutter is really important, and that's kind of where we go with that. Next question is from Sage Smock. For those of us without huge model collections, what advice do you have for playing lists that aren't tuned for maximum efficiency? So this question is really getting down into the nitty-gritty of how you're going to be building your warbands and what you're going to be building for. It depends on which side you're coming at it from. If you're starting from the Warcry bespoke warband side of things, right? So maybe you've got a box of Rotmire Creed, for example, and you've got another few miniatures that you can throw into that. That's very different from saying, okay, I've got my Age of Sigmar army where I'm going to effectively curate my entire list. Now, if you don't have huge miniature collections, generally within the bespoke warbands, there will be a little bit of wiggle room for you to do things. So let's say Rotmire Creed again. If we're looking at the carrying catchers, they have 2 builds, and the Impaler from the carrying catchers is just a better weapon than the hooked net. So that's one thing to think about when you're building your lists, and actually when you're building your miniatures, which of the builds in the box is better and will get you more bang for your buck. If you're coming at it from an Age of Sigmar standpoint, I think you'll have a slightly easier time because you'll be able to pick from your entire collection. It's very possible that there will be some things in Warcry that are pretty good that aren't good in Age of Sigmar that you just won't have access to. So that's just something you kind of have to suck up.
Yeah.
Alternatively, if you are a dab hand at converting, you can try that out. Not every miniature that I own for Warcry is the stock miniature that you just get in the box. A lot of it's converted. A lot of it is themed towards my particular style of army and my particular style of list that I'm bringing. But they're also much cheaper than they would be if I had to go out and buy an entire box of Thunderers, for example, just for one miniature.
Just for one guy, yeah.
Exactly. It would be prohibitively expensive. I do check eBay a lot. You can generally get singles on eBay.
I was going to say eBay is, for a lot of things, especially kind of a bit odd stuff, you can sometimes find people who put like half a unit of things up, or there's like an already built but unpainted unit of something that's going for ridiculously cheap because nobody wants to buy a built unit that's not painted.
And just on the last point about lists that aren't tuned for efficiency, I still think you can get efficiency given the miniatures that you have, right? It goes back to the very first question where you're thinking about, let's look at this group of fighters. What do they do and what do they do well? And if they do something particularly well, then you can say, okay, I can tune my list for that to make the list do one thing really well as opposed to a lot of things not all that good.
It's like I ran Beastman using essentially models from your Beastman collection, and it was mostly best gauze and some gauze. So even if you don't have a huge collection of models, depending on the faction you're playing, it was actually quite efficient because the beast gauze are actually a very efficient model in terms of points.
Yeah.
So actually it's quite an efficient list, but it was only using like 3 different actual models from the range, which if you had a Beastman army, you'd have tons of those.
And it didn't have any allies in there. It didn't have any fanciful Fomeroid Crusher or anything like that.
No, the only thing that it was running originally was the Dragon Ogre Shaggoth. You may or may not already own if you had a Beastman.
I happen to have one, so it went in.
But that's the thing, is like, depending on the armies you may own, you can make good Warcry lists. And generally, any collection can make a generally passable team in Warcry, which is the good thing. It'll never be maximally efficient, because to do that, you're going to want to bring, well, you need this ally character, you need this ally character, and you need 4 of these.
Yeah, and you need a Bladeborn that's out of stock for 20 years.
Yeah, but at that point, you know what you're getting into, and if you're going to do that, you're going to pay and do it.
Yeah,
but if you're just trying to use your collection, efficiency sometimes isn't the whole thing. When it's, you just take the best things you can. That's mostly what you do in Warcry. It's like, what's the best thing I can take from this list?
Yes, very, very much so. And again, just choose what you want your warband to do. It doesn't have to be the best at it, but as long as it's capable, then you should be absolutely fine. Because, like I said, no list is good in all 3 mission types. They all have something where they are not as good. But if you can make your list very good in 1 or 2 of those, you'll have a good time, I think. Next one is from Pyro Guy. I know you tend to use conversions and kit bashes in a lot of your warbands. Thank you for loving my custom Vargul for Nikelian King. It may be a good idea to go over the process of getting kit bashed and converted miniatures approved for use in official events. And then there's a question about my process going about a kit bash and why do I choose to make custom models. The first question is very easy. For Games Workshop run events, the entire model has to be either Games Workshop components or sculpted yourself, or some combination of both.
Yeah, I think there's a slight wiggle room on some of it now, because they've said you can have 3D printed parts as long as they're non-commercial, and they
like
kind of
have to have designed them. Or
they flip flop back and forwards. But if you weren't going to a Games Workshop event, always in the rules packet has a whole bit about conversions, and if you're not sure, it says to contact them, and that's the main thing. Is you contact them, send them a picture, and they'll go, "That's cool," or "Sorry, you're using a model from Rackham Miniatures instead of a Games Workshop model." And they'll say, "Sorry, you'll need to use something else." But and again, most, how say, third-party tournaments, basically any independent tournament, generally, if you have a conversion or a kit bash or even an entire faction that is different models to represent something, as long as you talk to the TO, send them pictures, and they agree that it's fine, that's the main thing. I was at Kill Team a couple of weeks ago, and there was a Tau Force for Kill Team, which was made from Skaven.
Okay.
He still had Tau drones, and they were painted yellow. They were painted like rounds of cheese, but they were tau skaven, so they were skaven with a lot of tau bits on them, and they got okayed. He technically was at a disadvantage because his models were smaller than the normal tau. So you're meant to measure from line of sight from the head. So when your model is smaller, it's actually more difficult for you. It's also slightly easier because you can hide them better, but it's a kind of a double-edged sword. But he got them okayed, and they looked good. So generally, there was no confusion. The main thing is having no confusion of what one model is for another.
Yeah. So your miniatures have to be identifiable as what they are. If it's a guy with a great weapon, big old weapon, right? So your opponent,
not a pair of daggers.
Yeah, not a pair of daggers, exactly. So your opponent knows what it is that they're fighting, and it's not just like, oh, I think I'm fighting this, but I'm not fighting that. And also, when I try and do things, I try and match the size and the general profile of whatever it is that I'm converting for, just so there's I can't get any advantage out of the model being taller or wider or whatever. Oh, and also make sure that they're on the correct base size.
That's probably the most important thing is the base size, especially for Games Workshop events.
Yes, and if you are in doubt of what base size something should be, if you go to Games Workshop's website, find the miniature that you want to make a conversion of. They will tell you what base it's shipped with, so you can always just do it that way. On the second question here, my process for going about a kit bash, I like to theme my armies. Famously, I hate painting. It's easily the worst part of the hobby for me. But I really like converting things, and I like mashing models together and making something really cool and really interesting. So I like to theme my forces, maybe around a story or maybe around an idea. So my Hunters of One-Chi, for example, I wanted an Achillean King in there, but I didn't just want an Achillean King because why is Fish Elf in the middle of the jungle? If you get me,
with a bunch of lizardmen.
With a bunch of lizardmen, exactly, yeah. And I've got like my converted Mizzen Master, which is made out of one of the Blood Bowl Amazons. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on there, and I really try and make sure that the list itself that I'm taking looks cohesive and it looks like it could all be from one army, and that's really what I go for. And then it comes down to like, okay, well, I'm making an Achillean King size thing, so it's got to be a certain size, it's got to be a certain height, certain width. So what can I use that will be able to represent that kind of miniature, and how can I make that fit in?
A friend of ours, John, who does Can You Roll Crit, he's just done a team of Cludian Star Striders, which are the rogue traders. But he wanted to do a little bit different from the normal one, so he made all his arms out of Escher Ganger models, but he made sure he kept the profiles of how they looked very similar to the actual models. It's meant to represent the Star Striders a bit older than the current team is. So like he's got the his Electromaster is another Necromunda model, but he's like, oh well, he looks like the other guy, but he's just a bit more upgraded.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's all about telling a story with a team, but the main thing is trying to make sure you don't make anything that's too far from what you're trying to do. So there's no point making Hunters of One-Chi and using Saurus for your Hunters of One-Chi because they're going to be huge.
Yes, exactly.
But you could technically do Hunters of One-Chi probably using Skaven Assassins.
You could,
which actually could probably be a pretty fun little idea of having Skaven Assassins, but using the Hunters of One-Chi rules.
I might steal that. Maybe.
There we go. So that's an example of doing something. You want to play Skaven, you want to play Assassins, but their rules maybe aren't as good as Skaven.
Or they might not exist.
It allows you to use maybe even models in your collection that you have as a team that doesn't. But as long as you keep the theme and the style the same, so they're identifiable, most people don't have an issue.
Yeah, exactly. And next up, I've got a couple of questions here, one from Alfie Stevens and another one from Airship Montreal. What's your best moment of tactical genius in a tournament? And what steps you take to prepare? And then your most surprising moment at a recent tournament, or in a particular any edge of your seat dice rolls or surprising underdog victories. Tactical genius, I don't know. I'm not really known for amazing levels of tactical genius. I just kind of do what I do, and it tends to turn out all right. Charles, how about you start with this one? I'll give this a little think.
Oh, tactical genius.
It doesn't have to be recent. We've been going.
No. Mostly, a lot of the times, it's been just not being too focused on one part of the game. It's mostly come from Kill Team, where Kill Team is very much a game about angles, and you're playing against. I was playing against some space. I think it was Intercession. Oh no, it wasn't Intercession. It was a Harlequin player I played against when I did this, and I had some of my guys on one side of the board, some of my guys on the other, some in the middle. He got so hyper focused on one part of the board, and he moved his guy and was like, "Cool, I'm perfectly safe here. You can't shoot me." And I was like, "Cool, you done with your turn? Yeah, I'm done with my turn. Okay, I'm going to activate the guy on this side of the board. He's just going to walk forward. He can now see a guy in the open and kill him." And it was like, oh, I didn't even see that happening. It's like, it's all about being able to just not get too focused on one thing. There's lots of moments where you do something, it works just by accident. You're like, oh, I didn't expect that to happen. It's amazing. It worked.
Yeah, and then you pass it off as you're some kind of
I planned
age.
that. I totally planned that. Didn't mean to not do that.
Yeah.
Something that was an edge of your seat thing though was actually in our last Warcry tournament, and it was actually the game against Dimitros who won it in the end. And it was not being able to roll a 5 with Stab It, I think, not Snotling.
You're talking about the Noblar.
The Noblar, that's it, yeah.
And then there's
Quiv.
the other
so
one. Yeah,
I needed to, on one set of 3 dice, roll a 5+ with my Ogre, or failing that, on 3 dice from the Noblar, get a 5+, to then make Quiv the champion of my side, who would have something like 30 points, and he failed to roll a single 5+. And it was just like, come on, like 3 dice, I need 1 5+, and he just failed. But it would have been utterly glorious if he had, because it would have just completely flipped the game back over to me winning. But it was not to be.
Unfortunate. Next time, Charles. Next time.
Yes,
Dimitros is coming back in the next event, so you get to have your revenge.
Well, if it goes anything like last time, there'll be Grand Hammers just walking up to ogres and just going, "Oh, 3 crits! Oh, that's a half dead ogre."
For me, I don't think. Again, yeah, I think you're right about making sure that you don't have the blinders on and be too hyper focused on one part of the battlefield. And if you can kind of almost force your opponent to do that, it makes you seem like you're some kind of tactical god.
Oh yeah, people call me a good kill team player. I'm not a good kill team player. I just don't get too focused on the game and on winning. Like I say, I like to win. It's a good feeling to win. But also, as if I can do at least a 50-50 win rate, I'm happy.
Yeah.
And that is part of tournament prep as well, is like, have a plan for what you want to get out of the event.
I think for me, my most memorable moments, I don't want to say most surprising or tactical genius, right? I think it was 40k 6th edition, maybe, possibly. That event, we went, because we used to do a lot of grand tournaments, and I took Tao to one of the GTs. And in this edition, if you had a drone controller, you could take up to 2 drones. So I thought, okay, this is the stealth suit
drone army.
The stealth suit drone army. Okay, so I had built this weird and wacky force, and it looked like absolute garbage. Like when you read the list, it's like, this is terrible. What is this guy doing? But essentially, it was built around 3 units of stealth suits, and each one of those stealth suits had a drone controller, and each drone controller had command over 2 drones. So these 6-man stealth suit units were actually...
It was 18 models in a unit, and 12 of them were drones.
That's it, yes. So that's the way it worked. And the weird quirk about drones is that they picked up any special rules that the parent unit had. So in this case, stealth suits. So they had the negatives to be hit. They had the always in cover rules. They had all sorts of additional weird and wonderful special rules that kind of went with the stealth suits in these huge swarms of drones that would go forward. And I was playing a Space Wolf player, and his buddy came up to him. He looked at my army. I arrayed my army out, big old units of stealth suits with the drones. And his buddy said to my opponent, you're going to have a good time on this one, because he was bringing a really hyper-tuned Space Wolf list with the cavalry.
It was a Thunderwolf cavalry list
with the Thunderwolves, all the guys in it. He had, was it Ragnar Blackmane, I think, was in there. And the idea was he was going to hit my town. He was going to explode. What he did not account for was the fact that 18-man units of stealth suit drones put out an obscene amount of shots, and that eventually even his 2 up-save Terminators would just fall over. And it was just turn after turn of me picking apart his army. We all had jump, shoot, jump, because
Oh God, yeah, it was old. Yeah, it was old jumpsuit
Yeah, because bouncers were good back in the day. So you could move, you could shoot, and then you could move away. So I had these massive clouds of drones just moving about the battlefield. Yeah, that will always stick in my mind. I won Best Tau player at that event. I think I topped in like the top 10 or something of players during that. But it was really a case of me looking at the Tau Codex and going, okay, this could be a thing. So this is what I'm going to play. And it really paid off, and I was super happy about it. That's it from me for today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, a little bit of a Q&A session between you guys and me and Charles. I hope it gave you a little bit of insight into how we do things at events, the kind of lists that we like to build, how we like to play.
Well, hopefully it's been enjoyable. You've learned some things.
Yeah, but yeah, remember we're not necessarily the world authorities on this. We just have a lot of time
we are
behind us.
We used to play a lot more tournaments than we do now.
Yeah.
Mostly because of life and changing things, but it's all experience, and that's what you get just going to any event. So if you can go to an event and it's not gonna cost you tons of money, and you can try and go to as many events you can. And the other thing is make friends. That's the main thing. Go there. Make friends with people. You'll have infinitely more fun when you can just like you'll finish your game early. You'll go around to somebody else's table. You'll be like, "Oh, cool, you're doing well. How you doing?" And you just meet people.
Even if you lose, it doesn't matter because you got your buddies with you and you're having a good time.
I think we had 18 of us at a 40k event at one point.
Yeah, 18 was the biggest amount of people we went to. We were something like a quarter of the entire field. So we totally didn't fix the painting competition. Nope, that never happened. And
I think having fun is really the main thing you should be doing, because in the end we're playing with toy soldiers.
We are, yeah.
Don't take it too seriously. I've seen people who take it too seriously, and it is not a good look.
For sure, yes, 100%. But yeah, anyway, thank you again. Thank you very much for coming on, Charles, and doing this little roundtable with me. For you guys at home, as always, if you want to see more stuff like this, maybe I can get Charles on more often. Who knows? Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let us know down in the comments section below what you thought about what we have to say today. Any interesting tournament memories that you might have, that'd be really interesting to hear, I think. And if you guys likewise have any other tips to anybody in the community, we're always happy to hear them. But yeah, that's it. That's been it from me for today. I've been Itan. This has been Off Meta Musings. That's been Charles.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we will see you next time.